The chamber was built for gods. That was the only word Reva Castillo could find for it, standing at the entrance with her delegation of 11 humans behind her, all of them dressed in their best dark suits, all of them trying very hard not to look up. The ceiling didn't exist, or rather, it existed somewhere so far above them that the light from 1,000 bioluminescent panels dissolved into a haze that looked like a trapped sunrise. The floor was a single sheet of something that wasn't glass and wasn't stone and wasn't metal, and it carried vibrations from every footstep of every species in the gallery. Thousands of them, packed into rising tiers that curved around the central platform like the inside of a throat. Reva looked up anyway. She counted 14 species she could see clearly from the entrance. One delegation appeared to be made entirely of light, contained in magnetic bottles that hummed at a frequency she could feel in her back teeth. Another was a single organism the size of a bus, its body a lattice of living crystal that refracted the chamber's glow into rainbows that drifted across the walls. A cluster of beings near the top tier had no bodies at all, just dense clouds of particles that shifted and pulsed in patterns that the translation matrix rendered as speech. The translation matrix. That was the thing clipped to her ear, a gift from the Concorde's contact team, and it turned every sound in the chamber into flat, polite English. It also, Reva had noticed, added a slight tone of condescension when translating anything directed at the human delegation. She wasn't sure if that was a feature or a bug. "Aeon Ambassador Castillo," the matrix said in her ear, translating the booming voice of the chamber's announcer. A Torvan, reptilian, 12 feet of scaled authority standing at the central podium, representing the species designated Soul 3 Sapient. Common name? Human. Soul 3 Sapient. Not even a real name. A filing code. Reva walked forward. Her heels clicked on the not-glass floor, and the vibrations rippled outward, mixing with the footsteps of species that weighed tons. She reached the speaking platform, a raised circle in the center of the chamber, lit from below, and stood on it, 11 humans behind her, 4,000 species above her. She smiled. The announcer continued. The Concord Assessment Bureau has completed its evaluation of the Soul 3 sapient species. The findings will now be read into the record. A screen materialized in the air beside the podium. Reva watched her species get reduced to a list. Average lifespan, 78.4 standard cycles. No regenerative capability. Single planet origin. Atmospheric dependency. Nitrogen-oxygen mix. Narrow tolerance. Gravity dependency. 9.8 meters per second squared. Narrow tolerance. Body composition, 70% water. No natural armor. No venom. No psionic capability. No electromagnetic sensitivity. No hive network. No distributed consciousness. No post-biological augmentation. The list went on. Every line was a thing humans couldn't do. From the gallery, Reva heard sounds that the translation matrix struggled with. It rendered them as sympathetic murmuring, but the tone was closer to what you'd hear at a shelter when someone brought in a 3-legged dog. And the announcer, HFY War, she'd memorized the name, folded his massive scaled hands on the podium and looked down at her. His eyes were amber with vertical slits, and they held the particular warmth of someone who believed they were about to do a very kind thing. Based on these findings, HFY War said, the Galactic Concorde classifies Soul 3 sapient as a Class 1 vulnerable species. Under Article 7 of the Concorde Charter, all Class 1 species are entitled to the protection of the Protectorate System. He paused. Let it land. In the gallery, several delegations made gestures or emitted sounds that the Matrix translated as approval. The Protectorate System, HFY continued, his voice carrying the practiced rhythm of someone who had given this speech many times, Tonihin assigns a patron species to newly contacted civilizations that lack the capacity for independent galactic survival. The patron species will manage the ward's expansion into galactic territory, provide military defense, vet and approve all new technology, and intercede in any conflicts on the ward's behalf. He looked at Reva, the way a grandfather looks at a child who has just learned the world has teeth. Humanity will be safe, he said. You have the Concorde's word. The gallery erupted, not in argument, in celebration. This was, by their measure, a good day. Another fragile species wrapped in the arms of something bigger. Another small thing protected from the dark. Riva stood on the lit platform and let the sound wash over her. She let the moment breathe. She let every delegation in that chamber see a small human woman. My 5'6", no armor, no claws, no bioluminescence, standing alone in the center of their cathedral of power. Then she spoke. Counselor Vor. The chamber quieted, not because her voice was loud, the platform amplified it, but because Class 1 species didn't usually speak at their own classification hearings. They cried sometimes, trembled. One species had fainted. Thank you, Riva said. On behalf of Earth and its people, I want to express genuine gratitude for the Concord's concern for our welfare. Dasik Vor inclined his massive head. Gracious. I have a question, Riva said. Of course, Ambassador. You mentioned protection. Yes. From whom? The translation matrix carried the question to 4,000 species simultaneously. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Riva felt the vibrations in the floor change. A shifting weight, beings turning to look at each other. Dasik Vor blinked, both sets of eyelids. From the dangers of the galaxy, Ambassador, from hostile species, from resource conflicts, from the threats that a young civilization cannot yet comprehend. Riva nodded. Could you be more specific? Which hostile species? That information is classified at the Concord security level and is not typically shared with... I'd like to request access. Another ripple through the gallery. The crystal entity near the top tier fractured slightly. Its version of raised eyebrows. Dasik Vor paused. He had managed the classification of over 200 species. None of them had asked for the threat assessment. None of them had asked which predators they were being shielded from. They had all simply been grateful for the shield. Ambassador, the protectorate system is designed so that ward species need not concern themselves with... I understand the design, Riva said. I'd also like a copy of the full protectorate charter, the unabridged version, not the summary that was provided in our welcome packet. And I'd like the list of species that have been considered as potential patrons for humanity. She said all of this the way someone orders lunch. No heat, no confrontation. Just a woman who expected to receive what she asked for because she had asked for it clearly. Dasik Vor looked at her for a long moment. Amber eyes, vertical slits. Those documents will be provided to your delegation, he said. Thank you, Counselor. Riva stepped off the platform. The ceremony wasn't over. There were rituals, blessings from elder species, a formal welcoming song performed by a species that communicated entirely through harmonic resonance. But the moment had passed. The chamber had felt something it didn't have a classification for. Not defiance, not aggression, not fear. A small thing standing in a room full of giants, asking for the paperwork. After the ceremony in the suite assigned to the human delegation, sparse, comfortable, clearly designed for something larger, Riva sat at the table and removed her earpiece. Colonel Marcus Wren stood by the window, looking out at the station's interior. A city built in a sphere, lit by an artificial sun. Ships moved through it like fish through an aquarium. 31 delegations made eye contact with me during the ceremony, Wren said without turning from the window. He spoke in Navajo. Had two operatives in the gallery, both. Had two operatives in the gallery, both pretending to be maintenance workers. Riva opened the welcome packet, glossy, translated into English with that same faint condescension. A brochure for the soon-to-be protected. They're kind, she said. Wren turned from the window. His face did nothing. They're kind the way a cage is comfortable, Riva said. The blanket is soft. The bars are still bars. She pulled out her personal tablet. Not the one the Concord had provided, the one they'd built themselves, shielded in ways the Assessment Bureau hadn't thought to scan for, and began making notes. How long? Wren asked. 3 months, Riva said. Here, we comply for 3 months. We learn everything. We smile. We say thank you. We eat their food and attend their seminars and let their liaison follow us around with a clipboard. And then? Riva looked at him. Then we stopped being the three-legged dog. Down in the cargo bay, a Concord customs officer was reviewing the human delegation's supply manifest. Most of it was standard: clothing, food stores, communication equipment, cultural gifts for diplomatic exchange. One line item gave him pause: medical supplies, trauma kits, surgical equipment, blood products, typed and stored for rapid transfusion, enough for a field hospital, enough for a species that had packed for a journey expecting to bleed. The customs officer flagged it, filed it, and moved on. Humans were class 1, fragile things. They probably just bruised easily. And he didn't think about it again. He should have. 3 months in, and the humans were perfect. That was the word N kept using in the reports filed back to the Concord Liaison Bureau. Perfect compliance. Perfect attendance at cultural integration seminars. Perfect submission of technology for review. Perfect cooperation with inspection teams visiting Earth. The humans opened every door, answered every question, smiled at every request. Inna hated it. Not the humans. Inna liked the humans, and that was part of the problem. The Kithla species experienced emotion as light. Happiness was a warm gold. Anxiety was a flickering violet. And the feeling Na got around the human delegation was a color that didn't have a name. Something between admiration and the deep bone instinct that said, "Pay attention? Something is wrong here. And the water's too still." N had been a liaison officer for 60 years, assigned to 11 ward species over that time. Every single one had resisted the protectorate in the first months. The Delvari had refused inspections for a full cycle. The Hollow Singers had attempted to smuggle weapons past the technology review. The Mosskin, gentle, peaceful Mosskin, had staged a silent protest by growing over the door to the Concord Embassy and refusing to unroot for 3 weeks. Resistance was healthy. Resistance was normal. It meant the species had pride, had autonomy, had a self-concept that pushed back against being managed. The humans had none of that. Or rather, they showed none of that. And the difference between those two things kept Anne awake at night, skin flickering a troubled indigo in the dark of the quarters. Reva Castillo was the center of it. The woman moved through the Concord station like water finding cracks in stone. In 3 months, she had learned the social customs of 12 species, not from briefings, not from the cultural database, but from sitting with them. She hosted dinners in the human delegation suite, small gatherings, never more than 10 guests. She served food from Earth, and strange, pungent, colorful things she called recipes from home, and she asked questions. Not political questions, personal ones. She asked the Minari delegate about her children. She asked the Torvan trade attaché about his retirement plans. She asked a maintenance worker from the drift species, a gaseous being that most council members walk through without acknowledging, what his favorite part of the station was. And the maintenance worker had flickered with such startled joy that the corridor lit up for a full minute after Reva left. Anne watched all of this, filed all of it, and understood none of it. She is gathering intelligence, Anne told the bureau chief during a private briefing. The bureau chief, a Torvan named Sethik, built like Dasik Vor but with less patience and more suspicion, made the gesture that meant amusement. She is hosting dinner parties. The dinner parties are the intelligence gathering. Sethik's amusement hardened. Anna, they're class 1. Their planet has 1 moon. They can't even survive the temperature range on their own world without wrapping themselves in dead animal skin. They're not gathering intelligence. They're being social. Some species do that. End skin when a cool blue. Agreement. Ashran on the surface. Underneath the indigo pulsed. The dinners continued. Reva never invited major delegations. Never the Torvan. Never the crystalline hegemony. Never anyone with real power. She invited the small ones. The species with 1 planet, 2 planets. The ones who sat in the upper tiers of the gallery because they'd been there the longest and mattered the least. The ones the Concord called legacy members, in official language and furniture in private. She remembered their names. She asked about their homeworlds. She brought them food, and Colonel Wren sat in the corner of every dinner, said nothing, and refilled drinks. N watched Wren the way a small animal watches a shadow that might be a bird or might be a branch. The man's face was a locked door. His body was still in a way that biological beings weren't supposed to be still. No fidgeting, no shifting weight, no unconscious movement. He sat. He watched. He poured wine from a bottle he'd brought from Earth, a deep red liquid the humans called something N's translation matrix rendered as the blood of the vine. N didn't find that funny, and didn't think it was meant to be funny. On the 42nd day, the quiet office flagged a report to NA's desk. Human cultural media had been translated by the Concord's automated systems and was circulating through the lower-tier species networks. This happened with every new species. Their art, their stories, their entertainment got absorbed into the galactic information flow. Usually it was unremarkable. The Moskin had contributed beautiful growth songs, and the Delvari had shared mathematical poetry. The humans had shared war, not just war stories, war, everything. Films, novels, histories, games, songs, paintings, statues, memorials. The Quiet Office's Cultural Analysis Division had run the numbers and flagged a statistical anomaly. Humans had more distinct words for types of armed conflict than the Kethla, a species that communicated through 40,000 colors of light, had words for emotions. The report called it a cultural curiosity and recommended no further action. N read it 3 times. The word count was not the thing that bothered N. The thing that bothered N was the tone of the human war stories. They weren't celebrations. They weren't clinical records. They were something the translation matrix couldn't quite capture. A mix of horror and pride and grief and dark laughter that existed in the same breath. Humans told stories about their wars the way other species told stories about natural disasters, as if the wars were something that happened to them, even though they were the ones doing it, as if they were both the storm and the thing caught in the storm. On the 61st day, Riva invited N to tea. Not a delegation dinner, a private meeting, just the two of them, in a small room off the main suite with a ceramic pot and 2 cups and steam that curled in the recycled station air. N sat across from the human ambassador and tried to read her. Among the Keith Law, emotions were visible. You couldn't hide them. Your skin told the truth even when your mouth didn't. We humans had no such transparency. Their skin did nothing. Their eyes did everything, but in a language Annie hadn't learned to read. You're worried about us, Riva said. Anna's skin flickered, caught, a burst of violet that faded to neutral. I am your liaison. Concern for your well-being is my function. That's not what I said. Riva poured tea. The liquid was amber. It smelled like the Earth cargo hold, like soil and something sweet and something burned. You're worried about us the way you'd be worried about a room that's too quiet, Riva said. You've been doing this for 60 years. You know what resistance looks like, and you know what we look like. What do you look like? Anne asked. Like something that's choosing not to resist, and that bothers you more than resistance would. Anne said nothing. You think? Then why? Because we're not for the reason you think. Then why? Because we're not pretending. We genuinely appreciate what the Concord is offering. Protection is valuable. We know that better than most. Then why does it feel wrong? Anna's skin went still, completely still. A Keth law going dark was the equivalent of a held breath. Riva set her cup down. You asked me a question once, through the official channels, 60 days ago. You asked why humans never talk about their wars. You didn't answer. I'm answering now. Riva looked at N, and her eyes, brown, ordinary, good the color of the dirt on a planet N had never visited, held something that the translation matrix would have rendered as calm, but that N's empathic senses read as a controlled fire behind glass. We don't talk about our wars, Riva said, because they're not in the past. Every human alive carries them. We didn't evolve past violence. We evolved through it. We are what's left after 10,000 years of asking one question over and over. What question? What are you willing to do to survive? The room was quiet. The tea cooled. Every species in this station has an answer to that question, Riva said. Most of them answered it once, a long time ago, and then built a civilization on top of the answer and tried to forget. We never forgot. We can't. It's in everything we make, our stories, our songs, our buildings, and our food. She gestured at the teacup. This plant, the leaves in this cup, We cultivated it during a period of our history when three empires were fighting over a trade route. People died for these leaves, and we still drink it every morning." She smiled. It was the saddest thing N had ever seen a face do. "We do talk about our wars," Riva said. "You just classified it as entertainment." N left the room with skin cycling through colors too fast to name. In the corridor, the drift maintenance worker, the gaseous one Riva had spoken to weeks ago, floated past and paused. "You okay?" it asked. N realized this was the first time in 60 years a non-Kethla had asked. Back in the human suite, Ren was waiting. "How much did you tell her?" he asked. "Enough to keep her honest," Riva said. "Not enough to scare her. You sure about that?" Riva picked up her tablet, the one the Concorde didn't know about. The screen showed a map of the station, overlaid with dots, color-coded, labeled, tracked. Every delegation, every trade route, every political alliance and old grudge and secret deal she'd pulled from 3 months of dinners and conversations, and the simple, radical act of asking people about themselves. 31 species, she said. 31 delegations that the Concorde treats like furniture. 31 species that haven't had anyone ask about their children in decades. And they trust you. They trust that I remember their names. She set the tablet down, which is more than the Concorde has done. Ren looked at the map, the dots pulsed softly. "Phase 2? He asked. "Phase 2, Riva said. She tapped a dot on the edge of the map. Deep space, neutral territory, where a human colony transport was currently making its way through a shipping lane that the Concorde had marked as safe. "Let's see if they're right about that," she said. 12 hours later, they weren't. The distress signal hit the Concorde's relay network at 3:14 station time, and it tore through the chain of command like a stone dropped through water. A human colony transport, the New Meridian, carrying 800 civilians and a crew of 40, had been intercepted in the Caval corridor by a wreck raiding fleet. 6 warships, standard formation for a wreck predation run, 2 flankers to cut escape vectors, 3 assault craft for boarding, 1 command ship hanging back to coordinate. The wreck were mid-tier predators. Not the worst the galaxy had to offer, but bad enough. They targeted soft species in transit, cargo haulers, colony ships, anything that couldn't shoot back. They stripped the ships for technology, took biological samples for trade on the black markets, and left the wreckage drifting. The Concorde had been managing the wreck problem for 2 centuries, which in practice meant writing sternly worded resolutions and assigning protection escorts to species that could afford the fee. Humans could not afford the fee. Humans were Class 1. The Protectorate was supposed to cover them. The Protectorate fleet was 11 hours away. Dasik Vor received the report in his private chambers and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a cold physical shame. When 800 humans were sitting in a metal box in the dark between stars, and the only thing between them and the wreck was whatever standard security complement the humans had seen fit to bring. He dispatched the fleet, fastest available ships. 11 hours. He sat at his desk and did math. Wreck boarding operations took 2 to 4 hours. Even if the humans sealed the ship and vented atmosphere in the non-essential sections, a standard defensive measure, the wreck would cut through the hull within 6. The fleet would arrive 5 hours too late. Dasik Vor began drafting the condolence message. The protection fleet dropped out of transit at the Caval corridor at 14:22 station time. And Commander Thesic, a Torvan career officer with 80 years of patrol experience, had spent the 11-hour journey preparing her crew for a recovery operation. Body retrieval, wreckage cataloging, evidence collection for the formal protest the Concorde would file against the wreck, which the wreck would ignore, as they always did. What Commander Thesic found was a debris field, not the New Meridian. The New Meridian was intact, running lights on, holding position at the center of the corridor, steady as a parked car. No hull breaches, no atmosphere venting, no emergency beacons. The debris field was the wreck fleet, 6 warships, reduced to fragments. The pieces spun in a slow, glittering cloud that stretched across 12 kilometers of space. Juan and the New Meridian sat in the middle of it like a bird sitting in a circle of broken eggs. Thesic stared at her sensor display for a long time. "Hail them," she said. The comm screen flickered. A human face appeared. Young, female, freckled, wearing a headset that was slightly crooked. She smiled. "Oh, hi. You guys make great time. We weren't expecting you for another hour. Want a doc? We've got coffee going." Thesic opened her mouth, closed it. "What happened here?" she asked. The human, her name tag read Lieutenant Park, looked off screen, as if checking with someone, then looked back with the expression of someone who had been asked to explain something ordinary. "Oh, the wreck thing. Yeah, they showed up about 11 hours ago, tried to board us. And our security team handled it." She said this the way someone might say the plumber came and fixed the sink. "We filed an incident report already. Want me to send you a copy?" "Your security team," Thesic repeated. "Yes, ma'am." "How many personnel?" 40. 40. 40. Standard complement. Thesic looked at the debris field. 12 kilometers of what had been 6 warships crewed by a total of approximately 1,800 wrecked combat soldiers. 40 humans. "Casualties?" Thesic asked. Her voice had gone very controlled. 4 injured, nothing critical. PFC Rodriguez broke his wrist, but he says it was from slipping on the deck plating, not combat, so we're arguing about whether it counts. Lieutenant Park grinned. "He's gonna lose that argument." Thesic cut the comm, turned to her sensor officer. "Full scan. Huddy, everything. I want to know what weapons did this." The sensor officer ran the scan, then ran it again, then requested a third pass because the first 2 couldn't be right. The debris showed energy signatures that the Concord weapons database couldn't classify. The warships hadn't been disabled and then destroyed. They'd been taken apart, with a speed and precision that suggested the humans hadn't been defending themselves so much as demonstrating a point. The wrecked command ship, based on the blast patterns, had been the last to go. It had tried to retreat. It had not retreated fast enough. Thesic filed her report with a single addendum at the bottom, handwritten in her own script. "Reclassification recommended, immediately." At the Concord station, Riva Castillo received the news, expressed appropriate relief, when requested a meeting with Dasic Vor. They met in his office, a room designed for a being twice her size, with furniture scaled for Torvan bodies, and a window that looked out on the station's artificial sun. Riva sat in a chair that made her look like a child visiting a principal, and she didn't seem to notice her care. "Ambassador," Dasic said. He was standing. He hadn't offered her a seat. She'd taken one anyway. "I must ask you about the incident in the Kaval corridor." "Of course. Your colony transport destroyed 6 wreck warships. Our security complement engaged hostile forces in defense of civilian lives, yes. 40 personnel. Standard complement for a transport of that size." "Ambassador." Dasic placed both hands on his desk. His claws left small marks in the surface. "There is no species in the Concord registry that could achieve what your people achieved in the Kaval corridor with 40 combatants. The wreck are not a minor threat. Their warships carry 300 soldiers each. Your people were outnumbered 45-1. Riva nodded. "Yes, that's about right. And you suffered 4 injuries, one of which was a slip." Dasic stared at her. "Ambassador, the Concord classified your species as Class 1 vulnerable. Your bodies are fragile. Your lifespans are short. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no regenerative capacity. Your atmospheric tolerances are narrow. On paper, you are one of the most physically limited species we have ever contacted." "All of that is accurate," Riva said. "Then how?" "Because all of that is accurate." Dasic stopped. His amber eyes narrowed. Riva leaned forward in her oversized chair. Her feet didn't quite touch the ground, and she didn't care about that either. "Counselor Vor, let me ask you something. In your species' history, and I've read as much as the archives allow, how many existential conflicts has the Torvan species faced?" Dasic considered. 3, over the course of our recorded history. "How long is your recorded history?" 12,000 standard cycles. 3 existential threats in 12,000 years, Riva said. "We've had that many in a century, sometimes in a decade. Our planet tried to kill us with ice, then with heat, then with disease, then with famine. And when the planet took a break, we did its job ourselves. We have been at war for so long that we don't have a word for the absence of war. Now we borrowed one. Peace. And we've never quite believed in it. She paused. Let the words sit. You classified us by what our bodies can do. That's reasonable. Our bodies are exactly as weak as your assessment says. We break. We bleed. We die from things that other species don't even notice. A fall from a modest height can kill us. A small change in temperature can kill us. A piece of food lodged in our throat can kill us. She looked at Dosik with those brown eyes, ordinary as dirt, steady as bedrock. That is why we build things that make sure we don't have to rely on our bodies. That is why we invented fire before we invented writing. That is why the first thing we did when we reached space was figure out how to kill things in it. You are describing a weapon species, Dosik said. No, Riva said. Kuna, I'm describing a scared species. There is a difference, and it matters. She stood up. Even standing, she barely reached the middle of his chest. We don't fight because we're strong, counselor. We fight because we have never, for one moment in our entire history, been able to afford not to. Every generation of humans has lived with the knowledge that something is trying to kill them, and every generation has decided that the answer is not to accept it. She walked toward the door. Stopped. You asked how 40 people destroyed 6 warships. The answer is that those 40 people grew up on a planet where everything, the weather, the wildlife, the geology, the bacteria, and especially each other, was trying to kill them from the moment they were born. The wreck were not the scariest thing those 40 people had ever faced. The wreck weren't even close. She left. Dosik stood in his office for a long time. The marks his claws had left in the desk caught the light. That evening, NA accessed the full human cultural archive, not the curated version the Concord had prepared. The complete one, declassified at Riva's request, filed without fanfare in the general database. N started with the wars. There were so many names, so many dates, so many places that no longer existed because someone had decided they shouldn't. N read about trenches filled with gas, about cities turned to shadows on concrete, about machines designed to kill as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time, built by the same species that composed music that made N's skin glow in colors that had no names. One N read about a weapon that split the atom itself, the fundamental building block of matter, and turned it into fire. The humans had built it in secret, used it twice, and then spent the next 80 years terrified of what they'd done, pointing it at each other across oceans, daring each other to blink. They never blinked. They never fired. They just held the fire and kept living. N went dark for 2 days. When N resurfaced, the Kethlaw's bioluminescence had shifted to a color that other Kethlaw recognized immediately. It was rare. It was the oldest color their species had. Older than language. Older than civilization. Bred into their skin from an era when the Kethlaw had predators. The color meant, I have seen something that should not be real. And it is real. And I do not know what to do with this knowledge. The closest translation in human language was awe, or fear. The Kethlaw had never needed to distinguish between the two. The emergency session was called on a rest day, which had not happened in the Concord's recorded history. Rest day was sacred to at least 40 species, and mildly important to 300 more. And the fact that Dosik Vor had overridden the schedule told everyone in the chamber what they needed to know before a single word was spoken. Something was wrong. Something was wrong enough to break tradition. The gallery filled fast. Species that usually sent junior delegates sent their primaries. The crystalline hegemony, who normally communicated through a single-faceted representative, sent 3, which meant internal disagreement. And the drift collective thickened near the upper tiers, their gaseous bodies pressing together until the section of the gallery looked like a slow-moving storm cloud. Even the light beings in their magnetic bottles pulsed at a frequency that the Kethlaw interpreted as agitation. NA sat in the liaison section, skin cycling through muted colors, trying to project calm professionalism and achieving something closer to the look of a person sitting very still on a bus that might be on fire. Reba Castillo sat in the human delegations assigned section, lower tier near the floor, where Class 1 species were placed for easy access to emergency exits. She wore the same dark suit she'd worn at the classification hearing 3 months ago. Colonel Wren sat beside her, hands folded. My face doing its usual impression of a granite cliff in no particular hurry to erode. HFY War took the podium. He looked older than he had 3 months ago. The scales around his eyes had dulled, and his hands, and those massive, clawed hands, rested on the podium surface without gripping it, which for a Torvan signaled something past anger and into the territory of resignation. The Concord Assembly is called to emergency session, he began, to address the reclassification of species Sol 3 sapient, humans, from Class 1 vulnerable to Class 4 apex threat. The chamber erupted, not in the polite murmuring of the classification hearing. This was noise, real noise. The kind made by 4,000 species who had all received the same intelligence briefing in the last 12 hours and had come to very different conclusions about what it meant. HFY raised a hand. The chamber quieted. Not silent. Species don't go silent when they're scared, but quieter. A held breath kind of quiet. 3 days ago, HFY said, a human colony transport was intercepted by a wreck raiding fleet in the Cavell corridor. 6 warships, 1,800 combat personnel. The humans defended themselves with a security complement of 40 individuals and sustained 4 injuries, one of which was a slip on deck plating. He paused to let the absurdity of that last detail land. It landed. The Concord Assessment Bureau has since conducted a full review of all human activities since first contact. I will now present the findings. The air screen materialized beside him. HFY began. Item 1. The Cavell Corridor Engagement. Sensor data showed weapon systems that did not exist in the Concord Registry. The human security complement had deployed technology that the Bureau's analysts could not reverse engineer from the debris because the debris was too thoroughly destroyed. Item 2. The Cultural Archive. Declassified at the human ambassador's own request. A fact HFY emphasized, because it meant the humans wanted the Concord to see this. The archive contained the complete military history of a species that had been fighting itself and its environment without pause for 10,000 years. The Bureau's conflict analysts had attempted to catalog the number of distinct wars in the archive. They stopped counting at 14,000. Item 3. The medical supplies. The human delegation had arrived at the Concord station with enough trauma surgery equipment to operate a field hospital. Before first contact, before the classification hearing, before they knew whether they would be welcomed or attacked, they had packed for blood. Item 4, and this was the one that changed the temperature in the room. The cultural attachés. In 3 months, the human delegation had embedded 31 operatives. HFY used the word operatives and let it hang in the delegations of 31 minor species. These individuals had been introduced as cultural exchange personnel. They ate meals with their host delegations. They attended social events. They helped with translation issues. They were, by every external measure, friendly visitors engaged in harmless diplomacy. They had also, in those 3 months, learned languages the translation matrix didn't cover. They had mapped every political alliance and grievance in the Concord with a detail that suggested professional intelligence gathering. They had identified the quiet office's operatives, documented their movements, and, HFY's voice dropped here, just slightly, had begun counter-surveilling them. The room didn't erupt this time. It went cold. In summary, HFY said, and his voice was very steady, the species we classified as the most vulnerable civilization the Concord has ever contacted has spent 3 months conducting a comprehensive intelligence operation across our entire political structure, while simultaneously demonstrating military capabilities that exceed most of our combat-rated species. He looked at the human section. The assessment was wrong. The crystalline hegemony delegate stood, or rather expanded. The crystal being grew upward, light refracting through its body in sharp patterns that the Kethla read as aggressive formality. The hegemony moves for immediate reclassification and the implementation of Quarantine Protocol 7, the delegate said. The human homeworld is to be isolated. All human personnel are to be confined to their delegation quarters. The protectorate is to be dissolved and replaced with a containment framework. A second later, the Torvan defense minister seconded the motion. Then the chamber broke open. Half the delegations wanted quarantine. A quarter wanted the protectorate reinforced with military oversight. A tenth wanted to pretend nothing had happened and table the discussion. The Drift Collective, which hadn't spoken in a council session in 8 years, said one word, "Wait," and nobody listened. Reva sat in her chair, hands in her lap, and watched the chamber tear itself apart. Ren sat beside her with the same expression he'd worn for 3 months, the same expression he would wear in a hurricane, or at a birthday party, or standing in the ruins of everything. Then he stood up. The motion was so unusual. The human military attaché had never stood in a council session, had never spoken, had barely been registered as present. That several nearby delegations went quiet out of sheer surprise, and the quiet spread outward like a ripple. Ren walked to the speaking platform. He was not tall by Torvon standards. He was not impressive by crystalline hegemony standards. He was a man of average height in a dark suit, and he walked with the unhurried gait of someone who had learned a long time ago that rushing made you miss things. He stood on the lit circle. He looked up at the gallery, and he began to read. Names, dates, coordinates. The Torvon border expansion of Cycle 4312. 3 systems seized from the Minari under the pretext of defensive repositioning. The crystalline hegemony's trade embargo of Cycle 4340, which had starved the Holosinger homeworld for 2 years before the Concord intervened. The Quiet Office's surveillance operation on the Kethla Diplomatic Corps, still active, never disclosed, running for 31 years. The Drift Collective's forced relocation from the Nebula wards, framed as environmental protection, executed as territorial acquisition by the hegemony. He read for 4 minutes. The list covered 50 years, every major species, every dirty secret the Concord had buried under procedure and protocol, and the comfortable fiction that the powerful species were civilized. The chamber was silent, not the held-breath silence of anticipation, the caught-in-the-act silence of a room full of beings who had been certain their closets were locked. Ren stopped reading. He looked at Dasik Vor. "Your assessment of us was wrong," he said. His voice was quiet. The platform carried it. "But your assessment of the galaxy was right. It is dangerous. Mash, you were just wrong about who makes it that way." He stepped off the platform and walked back to his seat, sat down, folded his hands. Reva stood. She didn't walk to the platform. She spoke from the human section, looking up at the gallery the way you'd look up at a mountain you intended to climb. "Counselor Vor," she said, "members of the Concord, I understand the alarm. I'd be alarmed too. You thought you were adopting a stray, and the stray turned out to have teeth." A few species made sounds the Matrix translated as nervous laughter. "So let me be clear about what we want. Not what you think we want, not what your threat models say we should want, what we actually want." She paused. "We want a seat." The chamber waited. "Not above you, not below you. At the table. Equal membership. Full voting rights. No patron. No protectorate. No containment protocol." The hegemony delegate flared. "On what basis?" "On the basis of what we've done with the 3 months you gave us." Reva's voice didn't rise, didn't harden. It stayed exactly where it had been since the first day. Calm, clear. The voice of someone who had spent 6 years negotiating with people who had guns and had learned that volume was the first thing you gave up. "You're looking at our intelligence operation and seeing a threat. That's fair. Look closer. Every one of those 31 attachés embedded in your minor delegations, what did they actually do?" She let the question sit. "They shared human agricultural techniques with the Minari, who have been struggling with crop yields for 50 years because nobody on the council thought it was important enough to address. They shared medical knowledge with the Holosingers, whose infant mortality rate has dropped 11% in 3 months because a human doctor showed them a procedure we invented 400 years ago. They shared engineering solutions with the Drift Collective that allowed them to stabilize 3 of their atmospheric habitats." She looked at the hegemony delegate. "For free. No contracts, no debts, no leverage. Free." The chamber was processing. 4,000 species, recalculating. "You built a system," Reva said, "where the strong protect the weak by controlling them. You call it the protectorate, and you believe it's mercy. Maybe it started that way. But look at what it's become. The strong species sit at the top. The weak species sit where you put them. And nobody asks the weak species what they need because the strong species already decided. She looked at the gallery, the upper tiers, where the small delegations sat, the ones she'd hosted dinners for, the ones she'd remembered. We didn't come here to be protected. We didn't come here to conquer. We came here because we've spent 10,000 years learning the same lesson over and over and over, and we finally want to try sharing it. What lesson? Dosick asked. That nobody survives alone, not even the strong ones. The chamber sat with that. Dosick Vor sat with it longest. He looked at the human woman, small, fragile, mortal in ways his species would never understand, and he saw something that his 300 years of life hadn't prepared him for. Not a threat, not a victim, a mirror. When the session adjourned without a vote, the delegations needed time, the hegemony needed to regroup, the quiet office needed to assess how badly they'd been compromised. That night, Dosick Vor sat alone in his chambers and opened the Human Cultural Archive. He had been avoiding it. He couldn't avoid it anymore. He started with the 20th century, 100 years of human history, the first war that used industrial machinery to kill, the gas, the trenches, the flu that came after and killed more than the war did. Then 20 years of silence, and then the Second War. Bigger, worse, mechanized, global. The camps, the bombs. 2 cities turned to ash in a flash of light. And then, this was the part that kept Dosick from sleeping, the humans didn't collapse. They didn't retreat. They didn't go quiet. They built. They rebuilt the cities. They wrote treaties. They went to their moon. They invented machines that could think. They connected every human on their planet to every other human in a web of light and information. They did all of this while pointing world-ending weapons at each other across oceans. They held the fire and kept building. Dosick read until the artificial sun in the station cycled to dawn. He read about the 21st century, the warming, the plagues, the wars that didn't end, the species that went extinct because humans couldn't stop growing. And still they built. Still they reached. Still they didn't stop. He closed the archive. He sat in the dawn light. He thought about a species that had every reason to give up and never once considered it. He didn't sleep that night either. The vote was scheduled for the 7th day after the emergency session, and the station spent every hour of those 7 days doing what political bodies have always done when faced with a decision that scares them, talking in circles and hoping someone else would go first. The crystalline hegemony held closed sessions. The Torvin Defense Council met 4 times. The Quiet Office produced a report so classified that only 3 beings were authorized to read it, and 2 of them immediately wished they hadn't. The minor delegations, the 31 species that had been eating dinner with Reva Castillo for 3 months, did something the Concord had never seen them do. They talked to each other, not through official channels, not in the assembly chamber, in corridors, in cafeterias, was in the maintenance tunnels where the Drift Collective lived. Small conversations, quiet ones. The kind that don't show up in intelligence briefings because nobody thinks to monitor the species that don't matter. En watched it happen from the liaison section of the station and felt the skin along both arms pulse in a color that meant something is forming and I cannot stop it. On the 3rd day, the Minery delegate, a small 4-armed being named Tessic, who had attended every one of Reva's dinners and who had cried quietly when a human agricultural specialist showed her how to double her homeworld's grain yield, walked into the Concord Records office and filed a procedural motion. The motion was simple. The 31 minor delegations wished to register as a formal voting bloc under Article 12 of the Concord Charter. And they had a name. They called themselves the Table, a human word, Tessic explained, that meant the place where everyone sat at the same height. The records officer processed the motion. It was legal. It had always been legal. Nobody had ever done it because nobody had ever organized the minor species into a single political unit. Nobody except a woman who remembered their names. By the 5th day, the Table had become the 2nd largest voting bloc in the Concord, behind only the combined Torvon Hegemony Alliance. 31 species, individually powerless. Together, a weight that the Assembly's political math could no longer ignore. HFY received this news in his chambers. He was still not sleeping. The human archive was still open on his screen. He had moved past the wars now, on or past the plagues and famines and self-inflicted catastrophes, and had arrived at something else. Human art, human music, human poetry. He was reading about a man named Mandela who had been locked in a cage for 27 years by his own species and had walked out and forgiven them. Dosick didn't understand it. Not the forgiveness. The Torvan had concepts of mercy. He didn't understand the 27 years. A human lifespan was 80 cycles less. This man had spent a third of his life in a cage, and when the cage opened, he chose not to burn the world that had put him there. He chose to build. Dosick closed the archive and opened his voting notes. He had been planning to vote against human membership. He had spent 300 years building the protectorate system. It was his legacy, his life's work. And the idea that strength protected weakness, it was elegant, it was right. Except the humans hadn't asked to be protected. They had asked who they needed protection from. And the answer he had spent 7 sleepless nights arriving at, was that the thing humans needed protection from was the protectorate itself. Not because it was cruel, because it was comfortable, because it made the weak dependent and the strong complacent, and it called that arrangement mercy. On the 6th day, N requested a meeting with Riva. They met in the same small room, same ceramic pot, same tea. Reva looked tired, not the performative kind of tired that politicians wore like armor, but the real kind, the kind that lives in the muscles of the jaw and the weight of the hands. She had been carrying something for 3 months. Nana and the weight was starting to show. "You did this on purpose," N said. Riva poured tea. "You'll have to be more specific." "All of it. The compliance, the dinners, the friends, the rec engagement, the colonel's list, the voting block. You planned all of it before you stepped onto this station." Riva held the cup in both hands and blew on the steam. "Not all of it," she said. "The rec were a surprise. We knew something would happen. You don't walk into a galaxy full of predators with a Class 1 label on your back and not get tested. We just didn't know who would test us first. But the security complement was always going to be there. We don't send our people into the dark without the means to bring them home. That's not a plan. That's a principle." N's skin went quiet, a steady, low glow, the Kethla color for deep listening. "I've read your archive," N said. "All of it." "I know. I asked the database to tell me when you accessed it. You wanted me to read it. I wanted someone on this station to understand us. Not our military capability, not our political strategy. Us. What we are when nobody's watching." N.A. looked at Riva and the empathic sense, the one that read emotions through proximity, through air, through the subtle electromagnetic signatures that biological beings couldn't suppress, told Enna something that the files and the briefings and the intelligence reports never could. Reva Castillo was afraid, not of the vote, not of the Concord, not of the hegemony's quarantine motion or the Torvan's military posturing. She was afraid of being alone, of her species being alone, of standing in the dark between stars with 8 billion people behind her and no one beside her, and the knowledge, old as her bones, old as her species. That alone was how things died. "You didn't come here for power," N said. "No. You came here because you were lonely." Reva's hands tightened on the cup. One small movement, the only crack in 3 months of perfect composure. 10,000 years, she said. Her voice was the same, calm, measured, the voice of a negotiator. But her hand said something else. 10,000 years of looking at the sky and wondering if there was anyone else. Building telescopes, sending signals, launching probes, writing messages in mathematics and gold and music and strapping them to machines and throwing them into the void. She set the cup down. "And then you answered. And the first thing you said was, you need to be managed." N's skin went through 3 colors in a second. Guilt, recognition, something without a name. "We don't need a patron," Riva said. "We need a partner. We need someone to sit with us at the table and tell us when we're wrong, and let us tell them when they're wrong and build something together. That's what we came for. That's what humans have always come for." She looked at Enim, and the tiredness in her face shifted into something steadier. Not hope. Humans were too scarred for easy hope. Something tougher. The decision to try anyway. "That's why I made friends," she said. "Not assets, not allies. Friends. Because friends are the only thing that has ever kept us alive." The seventh day came. The assembly chamber filled for the last time. Every species. Every delegation. The gallery was packed in a way it hadn't been since the founding session. Bodies and forms and lights and gases and crystalline structures all pressed together, watching the central platform where the question of humanity would be answered. The procedure was simple. A vote, yes or no, full membership for Earth, or quarantine and containment. HFY War called the roll. The Torvan Defense Council voted no. Expected. The military establishment didn't like variables it couldn't control. The crystalline hegemony voted no. Expected. The hegemony didn't like anything that hadn't been their idea. 3 mid-tier species voted yes. Then 2 voted no. Then 1 abstained. The count teetered, and then the table voted. Kurtesik stood, all 4 arms folded in the Minari gesture of formal declaration, and spoke on behalf of 31 species. "The table votes yes, unanimously." The chamber shifted. The math shifted with it. 31 species, each with a single vote, adding up to a weight that the Concord had never calculated because it had never imagined they would speak with one voice. The remaining delegations voted in rapid succession, some yes, some no, most following the current they could feel moving through the chamber like a tide. When the count was final, the margin was not close. Humanity had its seat. Riva stood in the human section. She did not cheer. She did not smile. She closed her eyes for a moment, one moment, the length of a breath, and then opened them and walked to the podium. The signing was brief, a document, a seal, or a formal acknowledgement that the species soul, 3 sapient, humans, were full members of the Galactic Concord with all rights and responsibilities therein. No patron, no protectorate, no walls, no cages, no comfortable dependency wrapped in the language of care. Riva signed her name. Her handwriting was small and precise. After the ceremony, the chamber began to empty. Delegations filed out in clusters, already talking, already recalculating. The political landscape of the Concord had shifted, and everyone knew it, and nobody knew yet what shape it would take. HFY War found Riva in the corridor outside the chamber. She was standing by the window that overlooked the station's interior. The city in a sphere, the artificial sun, the ships moving through constructed air. "I voted against you," he said. "Can I know? Not because I think you're a threat." Riva looked at him, waited. "Because I have spent 300 years building something I believe was good, and you have shown me in 3 months that it wasn't." He paused. His scales caught the light. "That is difficult to accept." "It should be," Riva said. "If it were easy, it wouldn't mean anything." HFY nodded. A slow, heavy movement. "I told you, at the classification hearing, that vulnerability is a problem to be solved from outside." He looked at the city beyond the window. "You treat it as fuel." "We treat it as the truth," Riva said. "We are vulnerable. We will always be vulnerable. The question was never how to stop being vulnerable. The question was what to do about it. And your answer? Reach out, every time, even when it hurts, and especially when it hurts." HFY was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That unsettles me." "Good," Riva said. "That's the right response." They stood together at the window, the Torvan who had built the cage and the human who had picked the lock. Neither of them had anywhere to be. 20 minutes later, Ren found Riva in the delegation suite. She was sitting at the table, shoes off, feet tucked under her, working on her tablet. The map was gone. In its place was a document, dense, technical, full of agricultural data. "Visitor," he said. A young delegate stood in the doorway. Insectoid, 6 limbs, compound eyes that reflected the room in 1,000 tiny mirrors. New, newly contacted, newly classified. The translation matrix tag on its thorax was still shiny. Class 1 vulnerable. The delegate made a sound the matrix rendered as nervous greeting. "Come in," Riva said. The delegate entered. It moved with the careful steps of a being in an unfamiliar place, and its compound eyes swept the room, cataloging, assessing, looking for threats. Reva recognized the look. She'd worn it herself, 3 months and a lifetime ago. "You're the humans," the delegate said. "We are. They classified us today. Class 1. They're assigning us a patron." Reva nodded. "We heard what you did, what you said. The vote." The delegate's limbs clicked together. Anxiety or excitement, or both. "We don't want a patron either, but we're not like you. We don't have warships. We don't have weapons. We don't have—" "Teeth," Reva said. The delegate went still. "Neither did we." And at once, she picked up a data chip from the table and held it out. The delegate took it in 2 of its 6 hands, turning it over, compound eyes reflecting the small object 1,000 times. "That's a frequency code," Reva said. "Direct line to our delegation. If you need anything at all, you call. Will you protect us?" Reva looked at the delegate. 6 limbs, compound eyes, a body made of chitin and uncertainty, standing in a galaxy that had already decided it was small. "No," she said. "I'll teach you to protect yourselves." The delegate's mandibles clicked. Processing. "That's what humans do," Reva said. The delegate left, clutching the data chip like a first prayer to a new kind of god. Ren watched it go from the doorway, then looked back at Reva. "Another one," he said. Another one." She was already pulling up the file. Agricultural data, medical basics, engineering fundamentals. Everything a scared small species needed to start building the muscles the galaxy had told them they'd never have. Ren leaned against the doorframe. "How many do you think there'll be?" Reva looked at the file, looked at the window, looked at the galaxy, vast and dark and full of teeth and wonder and species that had never been asked what they needed. "All of them," she said. "Eventually." She started typing. Outside the window, the artificial sun turned, and the city and the sphere went on living, and somewhere in the corridors of the station, 31 species were talking to each other for the first time, when a young insectoid delegate was walking back to its quarters with a chip in its hand and something new in its chest. Not safety, not comfort, not the borrowed warmth of a patron's shadow. Something harder, something human. The stubborn, unreasonable belief that tomorrow could be built.